everybody, hope you're doing well. My name's Matthew and I post videos every Monday and Friday, so if you love the tingles, then subscribe because you are in the right place. Getting a bit croaky, before we get into today's video, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's subscribed and liked and is watching my videos. I really appreciate it, and I'm actually really blown away by it. So thank you everyone, and welcome if you're new. And in the words of Louise Pentland, if you're an oldie but goldie, what's up? So in today's video we are doing another true crime, and actually it's the last suggested case from one of my lovely subscribers. Although I think she's subscribed, maybe she just watches, who knows. On the list of cases for me to look at, so if you've got any cases that you want me to look at, then leave that in the description below. So today's case is of Dennis Nilsen. Dennis Nilsen was best known as the Scottish murderer of many young men in the late 1970s and early 80s. Who was Dennis? Dennis Nilsen was a serial killer who was born in Fraserburgh, Scotland. I think I said that right. Though Nilsen recognised his homosexual desires, he was never comfortable with them and began acting on them through murder and dismemberment. Nilsen's first victim was in 1978. He went on to kill, according to his confession, 12 young men and dissected their bodies. When police finally arrested him in 1983, it quickly became apparent that they had linked a series of reported incidents from lucky escapees over the previous 5 years. They might well have halted his ghoulish killing spree considerably sooner. His early life. Nilsen was born on November 23rd, 1945, in Fraserburgh, Scotland. His parents' marriage was an unhappy one, and as a result, Nilsen, his mother and siblings lived with his maternal grandfather, whom Nilsen adored. Nilsen claimed that his beloved grandfather's unexpected death when he was just 6 years old, and the traumatising viewing of his corpse at the funeral, led to his later behavioural psychopathology. His mother went on to remarry, and have 4 more children, leaving Nilsen a withdrawn and lonely child. Aware of his homosexual attractions, he claimed no sexual encounters as an adolescent, and at 16 he enlisted in the army. He became a cook, serving as a butcher in the army catering corps, learning the skills that served him so well during his 5-year killing spree. Upon leaving the army in 1972, he took up police training, where he discovered a fascination with the morgue visits and autopsied bodies. Despite the obvious advantages that police work gave to develop his morbid tastes, he resigned and went on to become a recruitment interviewer. Nilsen's first official brush with the police came in 1973. David Painter, a young man whom Nilsen had met through his work, claimed that Nilsen had taken pictures of him while he was asleep. Painter was so incensed that he required hospitalisation as a result of the confrontation. Nilsen was brought in for questioning about the incident, but was subsequently released without charge. In 1975, he took up cohabitation with David Galichan, in a garden apartment situated at 195 Melrose Avenue in North London. Although David denied that they had an homosexual relationship, this lasted 2 years, and when David left, Nilsen's life began a downward spiral into alcohol and loneliness, which culminated in his first murder 18 months later. The crimes. Nilsen became increasingly disturbed by his sexual encounters, which only seemed to reinforce his loneliness when they were over. He met his first young victim in a pub on December 29th, 1978, and invited him home, as he had on previous occasions. The next morning, overcome by a desire to prevent the young man from leaving, he strangled him with a tie before drowning him in a bucket of water, taking the corpse to his bathroom to wash it. He then placed it back in his bed, later remarking that he found the corpse beautiful. He attempted to have sex unsuccessfully, then spent the night sleeping next to the dead man while the actual fuck. He finally hid the corpse under his floorboards for 7 months before removing it and burning the decaying remains in his back garden. Nilsen had another close call with the police on October 1979 when a young student accused Nilsen of trying to strangle him during a bondage play session. Despite the student's claims, no charges were pressed against Nilsen. Nilsen encountered his second victim, Canadian tourist Kenneth Oakden, at a pub on December 3rd, 1979, following a day of sightseeing and drinking, which ended at Nilsen's apartment. Nilsen again succumbed to his fears of abandonment and strangled Oakden to death with electrical cable. He cleaned up the corpse as he did before and shed the bed with it overnight. He took photos, engaged in sex, and finally deposited the corpse under the floorboards, removing it frequently and engaging in conversation as if Oakden was still alive. His third victim, some 5 months later, was Martin Duffy, a homeless 16-year-old, who he invited to spend the night on May 13th, 1980. As with his first victim, Nilsen strangled, then drowned him, before bringing him back to the bed and masturbating over the teenager's corpse. What the actual hell? Duffy was kept in a wardrobe for 2 weeks before joining Oakden under the floorboards. His next victim was prostitute Billy Sutherland, 27, who had the misfortune of following Nilsen home one night. He too was strangled. Another one of his victims, 24-year-old Malcolm Barlow, was an orphan with learning disabilities who was soon dispatched by strangulation. By 1981, Nilsen had killed 12 men in the apartment, of whom only 4 could be identified. Given his penchant for preying on the homeless and unemployed in a large city, this is probably less surprising than it might be in a smaller community. Nilsen claimed he went into a killing trance on 7 occasions, actually freed the men rather than complete the act because he was able to snap out of it, rather than complete the act, because he was able to snap out of it. The majority of his victims were not so lucky. By the time Barlow was killed, Nilsen was forced to stuff him under the kitchen sink. He was rapidly running out of storage space, with half a dozen bodies hidden around the apartment. He was forced to spray his rooms twice a day to be rid of flies that were hatched from the decomposing bodies. When neighbours complained about the smell, he convinced them they stemmed from structural problems with the building. To get rid of the corpses, he would remove his clothing and dismember them on the stone kitchen floor with a large kitchen knife, sometimes also boiling the skulls to remove the flesh, also placing organs and viscera in plastic bags for disposal. This is actually making me feel physically sick. He buried the limbs in the garden and in the shed, and stuffed torsos into suitcases until he could burn the remains in a bonfire at the end of his garden. On occasions, he would burn fires all day. Without raising any suspicion from neighbours, he generally crushed their bones once the fire had consumed the flesh, and the police found thousands of bone fragments in the garden during the later forensic examinations. In 1982, in a desperate attempt to stifle his homicidal behaviour, Nilsen moved into a top-floor apartment at 23 Granley Gardens, Muswell Hill, also in North London, which had no garden and no convenient floorboards. Still unable to quell his impulses, a further 3 victims were killed in his apartment between his arrival and February 1983. These victims were identified as John Howlett, Archibald Graham, Alan and Stephen Sinclair, and presented Nilsen with much greater disposal challenges given the apartment's lack of direct access to outdoor space. He overcame these obstacles by boiling their heads and feet and hands, and dissecting the bodies into small pieces that could be flushed down the toilet and disposed of in plastic bags. My God. There were 5 other tenants in Granley Gardens, none of whom knew Nilsen very well. In early February 1983, one of them called out drain specialist Dino Rod to investigate a drain blockage. In the presence of the tenants, including Nilsen, the technician discovered rotting human remains when he descended via the outdoor manhole, and it was decided that a full inspection would be conducted the next day, after which the police would be called to investigate. Nilsen, increasingly aware of the prospect of capture, tried to cover his tracks by removing the human tissue from the drains that night, but was spotted by the downstairs tenant, who became suspicious of his actions. It was reported that on the morning of February 9th, 1983, he told a work colleague laughingly, "If I'm not in tomorrow, I'll either be ill, dead, or in jail." Nilsen was met on the evening of February 9th by Detective Chief Inspector J, who informed him that they wished to question him on the relation to the human remains that had been discovered in the drains. Upon entering the apartment, J noticed the pervasive foul odour and asked Nilsen what it was, at which point he calmly confessed that they were looking for was stored in bags around the apartment, which included 2 dismembered heads and other larger body parts. The arrest and trial. Upon his arrest, he immediately provided exhaustive details about his killing spree, admitting to killing 15 young men despite receiving a legal caution. He also admitted to the attempted murder of 7 others. Although he could only name 4 of them, at no point did he show any remorse, and appeared eager to assist the police with amassing evidence against him, even taking them to his older address to point out specific disposal details. After the confession, Nilsen was held at Brixton Prison pending trial. Whilst there, he wrote over 50 notebooks of his memories to assist the prosecution, and also drew what he referred to as sad sketches, which detailed his treatment of some of the victims. He seemed ambivalent about his fate, at turns without remorse, and in showing concern about public attitude towards him, he fired his legal counsel, then rehired him, and fired him once again shortly before he came to trial. His trial commenced on the 24th of October 1983. Nilsen was charged with 6 counts of murder and 2 charges of attempted murder. He pleaded not guilty to all charges, citing diminished responsibility. Due to mental defect. The prosecution relied primarily on the extensive interview notes that resulted from his arrest, which took over 4 hours to read verbatim to the jury, as well as the testimony of the 3 victims, Paul Nobbs, Douglas Stewart and Carl Stotter, who managed to escape, and all of whom he attempted to strangle. Despite attempts by Nilsen's defence to undermine the testimony of these victims by introducing evidence of their sexual encounters with Nilsen, their harrowing accounts inflicted serious damage on the defence's case. Physical evidence included photographs of the murder scenes, as well as the chopping board used to dissect the victims, and the cooking pot used to boil the skulls, feet and hands, which is now on display at the Black Museum at Scotland Yard. I didn't realise there was a museum for this kind of stuff. Creepy on so many levels. The defence case relied primarily on the testimony of 2 psychiatrists, Dr. James McKeith and Dr. Patrick Galloway. McKeith described Nilsen's troubled childhood, inability to express feelings, and the resulting separation of mental function from physical behaviour, which affected his own sense of identity and implied an impaired responsibility on the part of Nilsen. Under the intense cross-examination by the prosecution, however, McKeith was forced to retract his judgment about diminished responsibility. The second psychiatrist, Galloway, diagnosed Nilsen as suffering from a false self syndrome categorised by the outbreaks of schizoid disturbances, which made him incapable of premeditation. But most of his testimony was extremely technical, giving the judge cause to question Galloway's complex diagnosis. The prosecution called Dr. Paul Bowden as a rebuttal psychiatrist who had spent considerable time with Nilsen, finding no evidence for much of the testimony put forth by the defence psychiatrist. He stated that Nilsen was manipulative, with some signs of mental signs of mental abnormality, but nevertheless still consent. basically responsible for his actions. During the summing up, the judge dispensed with the majority of the during the summing up, the judge dispensed with the majority of the psychiatric jargon that had perplexed the jury by instructing them that a mind can be evil without being abnormal. The jury retired on the 3rd of November 1983, but were unable to reach a unanimous verdict. The following day, the judge agreed to accept a majority verdict, and at 4:25 p.m. they delivered a verdict of guilty on all 6 counts of murder. The judge sentenced Dennis Nilsen to life in prison without eligibility for parole for at least 25 years. Nilsen died in prison in 2018. Oh my god. That's so fucking messed up. So fucking messed up. I've literally got no words for this case. I mean, how could anyone live with the smell? I've never smelled a dead body, but I've seen TV shows and stuff, and it always seems horrific. Literally, how could you live with that? I mean, this was a very interesting case to read, but my god, it's so fucked up on so many levels. So sick. Oh, it's horrific. I hope you found this video super relaxing. I'm horrified. So horrified. But as long as you found this video relaxing, and yeah, if you've got any more cases you would like to hear, then leave me a comment below. I really enjoy making these videos. I am enjoying making these videos, and I intend to make more true crime videos. But if you have any other triggers or any other kind of videos you'd like to see as well, then again, don't hesitate to leave those in the comments below. I'm enjoying making content that you're wanting to watch, so yeah, keep it coming. But if you're fast asleep, I hope that you sleep well, and I shall see you in my next video. Night, guys.